so there's the ability for you to kind of type into the portal. Let me know if there are any problems with the audio, with the visual, and we can get that fixed. So, yep, I think we can get started. So thanks for joining us. Staying ahead of state regulations. This is a special session, so it'll be a little bit different from the typical webinar. We will definitely be going into the product, but we want to spend a little bit of time actually going over kind of our thought process, why we built out state regulations, and where we really see that area going. So for the agenda today, I'll go over who's presenting, a couple of updates on the company. We'll do a little bit of a 101. And then really the rest of this presentation is going through kind of what state regulations means to FiscalNote, and then would love to take questions at the end. But if as we're presenting you have any questions, feel free to type those in and we might be able to field them. So I am Amanda Wynter, your Client Education Manager. You hear from me a little bit. And I'm joined today by Daryl Hok.
Hello everybody, excited to meet you. Thanks for having me, Amanda.
No problem. So quickly, a couple of updates from the company. So we actually had kind of a cohort of interns come in this summer doing a lot of political research, and a couple of the things they kind of found out this summer looking at state legislatures and social media, that the Safety Review is most central in Florida. There are other kind of tips online, so that was pretty interesting. We also did some census analysis looking at employment across industries, and that it looks like in Nevada, food and accommodation, whereas agriculture in California is kind of the major one. Again, some of that is on our blog online, so you can check that out. This is an exciting one that we found out last week, that we'll be kind of joining a number of tech companies and take off Election Day in order to kind of encourage the company to get out and perform our civic duty in this election season. And then lastly, if anyone is in DC and doesn't have plans this afternoon, we're actually hosting our first community happy hour at Rural Society over here in Thomas Circle, right near our office. So would love to see you if you're able to join us. All right, so we can just start off State Regs 101. The thing behind this webinar is that we know a lot of clients may not be tracking state regulations right now. A number of you online do have our state regulatory product, so we hope that this is kind of educational for you as well. But then for anyone who's interested, please feel free to kind of throw us some questions. We're happy to share. So starting from the beginning. How do we want to start this, Daryl?
So I want to start by actually just highlighting policy from the very front, because a lot of times on the state level specifically, there are a lot of different terms that are used. Sometimes they call it the administrative code, et cetera, et cetera. So this allows us to be all on the same page. But on the left side is legislation. So that's where the focus of government affairs professionals on state levels typically is, where they'll look at the bills, follow them after they pop up, try to affect them as they can, and then once they're done with that process, they enter the statutes. At that point, that's where the state regulatory process begins. That's where we pull it, and we created this platform focused on that area. And that's where the rules are implemented to properly put those statutes into place, and then everything gets finalized in the code. So just to make sure we're all on the same page with any terms that we use, the code will be anything after the rules process, the statutes would be anything before that, and the bills would be the start of the process.
Awesome. Yeah, so kind of starting from the beginning, aims to be this cradle to grave platform, right? So as you're tracking your policy areas, your policy issues, from the moment that they're introduced as legislation, spending time building relationships with these chambers and trying to move legislation in your direction. After that, there's an entire process that happens with the statute and then going into these state agencies that we recognize a need and figured out that data is out there, at least to some degree, varying oftentimes, and so that's where we thought we could come in.
And so here's an image of the platform, our state legislative platform. So I'm sure you're aware, you've been following, very familiar with this. At the end of the process is where a lot of states actually say which public act or which public law it gets finalized in. And then that's when it enters the statutes change, and then from there, a lot of times on the regs themselves, they do mention the specific bills, or they just mention the statutes that give it authority to make whatever changes that they're looking to make.
Right. So, you can see here, it says Public Act 990823. Oftentimes that then is reference to the statute. And right now, the platform doesn't actually address the statute part, but that is actually in our roadmap going forward.
And so, what is in state regulation? I've had the opportunity to talk to a lot of different teams. So some teams that have dealt with it every single day. So particularly the insurance companies are very heavily related on the state level. But then other teams are just starting, or other teams that are wondering should they start. So to begin, there's the state register that is a compilation of a lot of the different state agencies, and any rules that come out within those agencies get put together in the state register. It's kind of like a magazine. So there might be once every 2 weeks, once every week, maybe once a month. And so at the more general level, there's a state register that captures information from several different agencies. And then looking at that one register, you'll be able to figure out what's going on. And so that's how every state has some register of some sorts, varying levels. Some of them are very detailed. Others only tell you a notice that there is something that's going on, but don't actually give you the text of what that reg is. Yeah. And for those states, you have to actually jump directly into those state agencies.
Yeah, we'll actually go over, and I think we take a look at what one of these registers actually looks like. The key here for us is that across all the industries, you have numerous agencies that are addressing different topics. So pharmaceuticals, insurance, education, and that goes across, right? Agriculture, transportation. As one company, you may be impacted by multiple agencies, right? So you're not just tracking one topic area, you're looking across number of agencies in various amounts of states, right? From 2 to 3 to all 50. And so really here, similar to the kind of idea with the legislative product, is that there is so much data. And right now there really was no kind of manageable way of really keeping track of that data over time. Actually wanted to ask a question. So you'll see kind of a poll pop up. We're just curious, right, from those of you that are on this call, how many of you are tracking state regulations? Either you yourself or whether someone on your team or someone else in your organization. So if you don't mind taking this poll, and you can just click the answer there, and then I'll be able to pop us out of that screen. I'll just give it a couple more seconds to let people answer. Awesome. All right. Thanks so much for answering that. So just for kind of an overview, it looks like overwhelmingly people are tracking state regulations, so that's really exciting. One thing for us is whether you have FiscalNote state regulations or not, it's interesting for us to hear kind of what you're doing now. So we'll be interested to ask you that a little bit later. Great. So we've talked about kind of the basis of state regulations. What does this process look like? Where does it fit into the legislative process? So let's just talk now, like what is this data? What is it now? What are these websites? And what is the challenge that many of you may be facing right now?
Yeah, this is directly synthesized from the research, the conversation I've had with a lot of different teams. So maybe it sounds familiar, maybe it doesn't, but a lot of times what I've heard is the teams would know the schedules of the registers. So every state would have their standardized schedule, whether it's frequent or infrequent. They would know when it would be published and then look back at those states that were published by the time. If they check it every Friday, they look at everything that's published from Monday to Thursday, etc. And then check the table of contents. So primarily, people would know which agencies deal with their topics. So they want to see if it's Department of Health that I care about, I'll go into the table of contents, see if it's there, and then specifically look through all those regs within there. Once I find ones that are relevant, then what do? I would have to put it in a spreadsheet, usually to put the basic information. If you're following really well, some of the states, you'll know there's a state like Indiana which doesn't have titles. So make up some sort of title, put some link of the information, maybe put the contact information or relevant dates. And then as the weeks progress, and just continuing the process. And so part of the pain points that I'll address a little bit later is something that's consistent for a lot of the people is that a state is going to release the regulations separately, as separate entities. Some states do have tracking numbers. Not all states do. Several states do not, actually. And so the part of the problem is whenever you see a reg pop up, it says a final version. Is that a new reg that you've never seen before, or is it an update of the previous reg that's already in your spreadsheet? So what that means for you is you'd have to look through the spreadsheet. If this is your process, you have to look through the spreadsheets, read through what you have for that state, what you have for that state agency, and then determine, is this the same one, is it not the same one? And often a big frustration we've actually seen by looking at the data themselves when we're gathering this is a lot of times it's a number that looks like it's a tracking number, but it's actually just a unique number that really means nothing in terms of tracking it through the process. And I define tracking as finding about something for the first time, and then when another thing pops up that's related to that first thing, automatically updating, because otherwise it's just discovering back and forth. So there is no tracking number for a lot of different states. And so what we had to do on our end, when I talk about a little bit more of the tech side of stuff, is we had to create these tracking numbers, create them based off patterns that we've seen, do some rigorous testing to make sure the quality is right, because what's worse than not being able to track is getting improper tracking. So we had to do multiple rounds of testing, jump into it, and contacting a lot of states to see if they had any method to do this properly.
Right. What was interesting kind of in this research and then working with the product team is that it's that the states don't really make it conducive to track this information, right? I think it's probably part of their job to at least post information, but as you can see here, this is an example of when South Dakota publishes, but that would mean that you as an organization have to know that about South Dakota and then have to know that about all other states, and then consciously check on this website every Monday, and then for the other 49 states do that across the board. So again, the pain point here was that it's not really conducive to keeping up on not only one agency, but many agencies, all the registers and all the rules that are relevant to your organization.
Yeah, exactly. And resulting in that is just a lot of times, so the teams specifically that don't really need to do this that closely, just decide that it's not that big it's not really worth it to spend that much time to track something on a state level if it's just a state like a state they didn't do business in as one of the core, like maybe something like South Dakota. Instead, they let that slip through the cracks a little bit because more often than not, the chances are that it's not something that will be relevant within that document. But then the flip side is that when there is something that is relevant, a lot of times they mention their boss or the trade association will say, hey, did you know about this? And they wouldn't really know about it.
Right, right. It's kind of the proactive, being the one to alert either your members or your internal stakeholders without having to hear about it on the front end, right? Because what does that mean? What does it mean to hear about it on that end? It means that something is about to impact the business, the bottom line of your organization, and you didn't know about it ahead of time. So, for example, this is an example of the New York Register, right, Daryl?
Yeah, so I'll talk a little bit about this. So this is meant to represent just what the registers entail. Another common thing that is essentially unnecessary time spent on stuff is the fact that a register is going to have a lot of agencies that you're not going to care about. In this example, if you care about Department of Health, once again, you could see there's higher education right under that, liquor authority, before that, environmental and civil service. Those aren't going to be relevant to your organization, but if you have to check on it every single time you look on the register, it's not really going to be customized to you. It's more of just, I'll read through this newspaper to see if any articles apply to me, but what would be ideal is if the articles are sent directly to me because those are topics I care about.
Right.
And so the next slide, we actually wanted to show some examples. A lot of this right now is the generalization of states, but I want to share some examples of specific states that I'm aware we've seen that they have particularly caused some problems because the data quality in those states aren't that strong. Same time, if anyone here is working for those states, it would be great if we could get some of this organized in a proper fashion that would make sense for people who are trying to follow it. But to start, here's New Mexico. So New Mexico does not have titles. So this is an example of a state that doesn't have a title. You can see these are for the proposed regs. It's called Notice of Proposed Rulemaking, which really has no significance. What that means is you might need to click into it. It's an agency you care about, but what the agency is releasing 4 notices. Click through all of them, read through all of them, and then somehow determine that it's relevant or not. So what we've done on our side for this specific case is every single reg has its own generic rule, or generic title if there is no title. So what that means is it would be the state, the agency, the date, and some sort of count if there's multiple ones within the date. But right under that, we've created a feature in which you could nickname the rules we want to. So through the interviews, a lot of people say that they would call different regs like the EpiPen reg of Indiana. And so that's the way they reference it whenever they talk to the trade association, whenever they talk to colleagues. And so for that reason, we put that as a feature to allow the ability, specifically if there is no title, but also even if there is a title, maybe the title isn't that descriptive. If you imagine this is New Mexico, there's some other states that are a little bit better, but still the title doesn't give up much. It's not like a bill in which there is a bill number. And a lot of times there may be reg numbers, but no one really refers to them with those reg numbers. It might be extremely specific just for that state.
Yeah, and another example of a limitation would be Georgia. So Georgia doesn't actually provide any of its information for free, right? So as a public citizen, I'm looking for agency information. They don't actually provide the proposed regulation, the proposed rule, or the final rule for free. We actually have to purchase final rules in order to present them in the system. So again, in that way, it's kind of bringing information that actually wasn't accessible at all to the user, to you who may be impacted by Georgia rules.
Yeah, exactly. So Georgia is a state in which there is a paywall no matter what to see the regs. So we decided we've purchased a distribution license for Georgia, but even so, we've requested having the proposed regs so someone can have the full process. They actually have told us that they don't have the proposed regs in any sort of fashion. Instead, we were only able to obtain the final regs, which means Georgia would be important for a compliance type of use case or just to know what's going on. But to actually know what's in the process, for Georgia, you would have to probably go into agencies themselves and have those type of relationships, and that's just by nature of the state itself. And Georgia is an important state. There are companies like Coca-Cola there, large companies in Atlanta, and so we didn't want to not have it on the platform, but at the same time, we're only able to get the information that the state is able to provide us.
And then Hawaii. Hawaii is our company's favorite state with regard to state regulations because, as we will show you, Hawaii doesn't really provide information at all. So just to give you an example, right, this is the Hawaii Register site. If we go to the most recently released register, this is the information provided. This one page. So unfortunately, right, we aren't able to actually show you anything from Hawaii's agencies because it provides kind of these numbers that we are assuming kind of collate to a larger document that isn't actually on this site. So just as kind of an example of the limitations we face in providing the information, but also, more importantly, the limitations that we know you must be facing as you're looking for this kind of information, this kind of crucial information.
Exactly. So as you see, those are some mentions of the code itself that's being amended. Right now, we're actively trying to contact the state of Hawaii to see if there is anything they could do to help give more context, particularly for anyone who's interested in tracking anything in Hawaii.
Right. All right. So, I think because the point of this is that wanting to help you understand where state regulations fits in and where FiscalNote fits in, but also recognizing kind of what we're able to do. So then it's, what did we actually build? So similar to the way that, you use the state legislative and the federal legislative and federal regulatory product, we built a database and then a platform on top of that database that provides timely updates. So as opposed to going through the process that Daryl outlined earlier, right, of knowing the schedule of agencies, checking those websites every week, bi-weekly, updating a spreadsheet, and then having to actually connect the dots yourself, giving you updates on relevant information based on keywords, similar to your discovery alerts now. Organize information, so actually linking those rules together so that when you see the proposed rule, you'll then see any of the follow-up documents after that. A centralized hub, so as you know, it's pulling in data as well as allowing you to manipulate that data. So place them into folders, look at mass distributions of where the majority of your information lives, and then on top of that, actionable insights. So once you've gathered this information, you could say at the end of a month, at the end of a quarter, here are where these rules came down. It's looking at taking data and then being able to move forward after that.
Yeah, exactly. So we tried, when releasing this product, we tried to really address some core value propositions. So the first of which is to centralize all information so it's all in one place. If you need to do any sort of search, if someone just asks you about a topic or you're curious, you can do a search. It searches through every single state regulation and then pulls it up very quickly. Then secondly is the ability to track. And like I mentioned, track defined as I care about this upon introduction, upon which it's first proposed. So I want to receive every future notification automatically without having to do any digging. And I want that to be connected with the first piece, which I already said was important. And so what we've done for those is we really focused on getting the data right, structuring it across all the states, making sure it's fully comprehensive. And then on top of that, as you can see for one of the, we do provide supplementary documents. For simplicity, we're talking about how we take the register, we break down to each individual regulation, we give it to you. What we actually do is we go faster by going to actual databases that a lot of states do have. So we get them before registers may be published. A lot of times it's online first. So we've created the scrapers that we use for legislation as well. So we've created a full set of scrapers for regulations. They dive into those, they find them all, categorize them properly. So we obtain the information directly before it's even published on the register, as soon as it's online. And then from there, we are able to provide anything supplementary. So there are a lot of times business impact statements. There would be pre-proposal notices, so drafts of some sort. Maybe some changes. If you're a good state like Connecticut, they might have a full-scale, every single document that's ever been talked about, including when the governor or the secretary of state has to talk about as well, or the attorney general, for instance. So we give you, at that point, we're able to provide one central source, the ability to track, the ability to have all supplementary documents so you know the actual impact of how important these regs are. And then on top of that, when the comment periods, the hearing dates, the contact information of who to talk to, when they're all present, we identify that as well, so it's very much actionable. If I do want to set up a meeting with my regulator in my state regarding this regulation, I know who to talk to, I know when to submit my comments, and I know when to attend the hearings. On the flip side of things, if you're familiar with our federal regulatory platform, there's a lot of analysis on the comments. So all the comments on the federal side are online. We take that, we apply our sentiment technology. So we determine which ones are pro this reg, which ones are con, what portions they're really talking about. On the state level, that's different. On the state level, the comments are not online. There are very few comments to start. A lot of the comments aren't online. For some states, they may be, and so they're attached to the documents that we have. But so that's one thing that we do not provide. And so one thing to differentiate our federal platform with our state platform. The value propositions are different. The ones that we look to address are the ones I mentioned a little bit earlier.
Awesome. And so Daryl was kind of going into the product, so I wanted to jump in and give us a look at the actual platform. You'll see it is the same platform that you use today, but where that lives is actually here in the omnibar. This is where you would select from the databases. You'll see here state regulations. So we'll select state regulations and then search the database. So similar to the search bar that you've seen, but with separate filters to go over those, you would select by state, select by the status of the rule. So, as Daryl mentioned earlier, if someone's looking kind of on the compliance side and needs to find out, are there any rules that were released within a certain date range, for example, that might impact us, based on a keyword search, I can find all the final rules that match that keyword.
And one thing about status that's interesting is that because we're able to connect the life cycle of the rule, I'll just call it that, the fact that this rule went from proposal to final, we actually update the status of that rule. So whereas if you treat them all separately, then it would just be a count of every single final rule would have a separate count for proposed, as in its first stage. But what we've done is we've updated that, and then we actually put these counts. So anything that's gone from proposal to the final stage is now considered a status of final.
Oh, okay, gotcha. And then lastly here, the type, because as we're talking, kind of the supplementary documents as well. We actually decided earlier, just to show you kind of the value here, as you create your discovery alerts, for legislation, for federal regulation, the idea of creating a state regulation discovery alert is pretty novel, right? So as we mentioned earlier, tracking on the state regulatory level doesn't really exist because of the way that the government provides this information. Now you'd be able to, based on your policy areas, actually search over and be alerted to rules either when they are proposed or when they're final. So again, this is kind of summating all of that process, summating the searching, the schedules, reading through the register, saving on a spreadsheet. You're actually getting emails based on your policy priorities of newly kind of proposed rules. And then again, as usual, kind of adjusting the preference of how often you'd like to get that. I have an example here that we can just look at what that looks like. So this is a pretty general education discovery alert. So you'll see it gives you the results just like it would with regulations and just like it would with legislations. If we click here into the card, so you'll note here this nickname the name the regulation. As you are using the platform and kind of adding in your input, this also will be searchable across the platform. So instead of searching for a particular number and date and state, you'll be able to search for, like Daryl said earlier, like EpiPen regulation and find that within the system. Let's see here, I'll find one for us to jump into.
Amanda, can you actually go into a general search for Connecticut? So Connecticut is going to be an example of essentially one of the best states for state regulations. Sure. They have several separate documents from the beginning to the corrected version to the final version to any impact statements. So we're able to get those all and then classify them.
Awesome. Let's jump into this one here. Awesome. So this is a rule page. So again, the name of this regulation here, then all this information, right? We're going to provide that ID in case you need to kind of note it somewhere, but we think that the name and then your nickname will actually be more helpful. You'll see the status of this rule, and then all of the documents, as Daryl was mentioning. So you'll see here, these little circles are actually just to show you what kind of information we're providing. So the proposal text, impact statement, and then what's great here is that clicking in will actually take you to that rule, as opposed to searching through pages and pages of a register will take you straight to that document.
And also on the top left, so for as many things as we can, a lot of times there are summaries that are out there just so you don't need to dive into the complete rule without having to do a summary, without knowing what it's about. And so for the states that do have them like that, for states that there's something that's pretty good for a purpose, we try to present that. The idea is on this page, we want to give you as much insight as possible into whether you do need to jump into it, read through the regs. We know that regs are very dense a lot of times, very long. So for those reasons, we try to give you some insight so you know when's the hearing, where the people. For this one, there's an example which there is no hearing. And the contact information, if you actually go down a little bit.
Yep.
It's over there as well. So whatever the state's able to provide us, we try to push it forward and give it to you all in one place.
Yep. And then lastly, for those of you who are using our collaboration tools, you're able then to take notes, leave actions, and kind of have discussion on these rules. So, and this is kind of where we're seeing kind of a longer vision, right? You're tracking policy areas, you're tracking legislation, you're doing, actions, you're logging your information, but then you're moving from the legislative process into the regulatory process. This was actually a question I had for Daryl earlier. It's like, it doesn't seem like maybe a lot of people are doing this, or from your research, it seemed like it was kind of difficult. Like, why is this important, or why really should they care?
Yeah, so that's a good question, and this is the core of what I look to find the answer to at the very start, because if it didn't really matter, we wouldn't want to go down this rabbit hole, try to make this platform, invest our resources. But ultimately what we found is, so back to the very beginning, so the process begins with bills, but it doesn't end with bills. So the bill process until the statutes are made, that's the first step. So when you are able to get or fight so hard to get a bill you really want to pass and it finally does pass, there is still opportunity that on the reg level that whoever was against that bill, or maybe the regulators just don't really know how to regulate it properly, that ultimately the end goal of fighting so hard at the very beginning does not go all the way, and the result is just something that leads to more work in the long run, or the need to do it all over again. So that's one. So that's because the bill process is very important, but it is only part of the process, and this gives you a more holistic view of affecting the change or influencing as you need. And then for the flip side is, this is more on the opportunistic perspective. So a lot of things do start in the bill process, but there are things that don't. If the statutory authority is already there, if an agency needs to do some sort of changes, Some agencies have more power than others. So it was Iowa, or it was Ohio, one of them with the I. They are able to do essentially skip the bill process, or they've done that before. And so by having access very simply to know the information of what's going on, allows you to be one to select people to influence those that are needed, or essentially to educate the regulators. A lot of times when speaking to the regulators directly, they have to manage as a DMV self-driving car, how to manage or put those regulations for self-driving cars. They'll want the expertise so they can make sure they're doing it in the right way. And so on the flip side of it is it allows you to be very close to the regulatory process and really just educate to make sure that everything's regulated properly, because as we know, the process is very long overall. So if something is done the wrong way, I guess there could be an emergency regulation that's released to fix it, but at the same time, they might have to go through the full process over again. And that's something that neither the regulators nor the people nor the companies want.
Okay, awesome. Well, I mean, I think kind of overall, it kind of harkens back to one of the messages that we've been kind of through these webinars, through some of the other educational content is really the idea of being able to wield your influence, right? So there are relationships that you have on the legislative side with different legislators, with different chambers. You understand kind of the lay of the land, but the state regulatory area landscape is a little bit more opaque, right? Impenetrable if you're Hawaii, right? And so the idea here being giving you the ability to be influential at this late stage, rather than kind of holding up at the legislative level, is really where we saw this as valuable. So that was kind of the overview. I think that we covered all the questions we had. We want to give you a chance to ask any questions that you might have, and then I actually have one last poll. If you don't mind answering, that would be great. And we'll just hold off here for any questions for a couple of seconds, and then if we don't have any questions, we can give you back a little bit of your time. Okay, so I don't think we have any questions. Again, thank you, Daryl, for joining us and giving us a little insider scoop into the product. You can always reach us at support@FiscalNote.com, and we thank you for joining. Hope this was helpful, and look forward to any feedback that you have after this. So have a great rest of the week, and if you're able to join us tonight, Rural Society, we look forward to seeing you there. Thanks so much.